Hey guys, FilthyRobot here, bringing another guides, tips, and tricks video. This time we are talking about Renaissance-era governments and Renaissance-era civics cards. So let's dive right in and get started with those. So let's go into the government tree now. So medieval was monarchy. We now have access to theocracy and merchant republic. These are the new governments available to us. They generate influence points at roughly the similar rate as monarchy. Not quite as much because monarchy gets the bonus influence towards envoy bonus that Theocracy and Merchant Republic don't. Theocracy gives us a very interesting, very unique bonus. One of the most interesting bonuses from a government in the game, in my opinion. And that is it gives us, well, the first of these is it can buy land units with faith. And all units have +5 religious strength in theological combat. I don't know why it says all units there. It should be all religious units have +5 strength in theological combat. But anyways, okay, whatever. So the second part of that bonus is not the interesting part to me. The part that's interesting to me is you can buy land units. This is military units, land combat units with faith. And then it has a discount on faith purchases, 15% starting and another 1% for every 15 turns on standard speed. So it's a slower rate of gain on that. It also runs 2 military, 2 economic, 1 diplomacy, and 1 wildcard, which I think is one of the most balanced setups ever. It's a very nice continuation from Classical Republic to Theocracy, where all you're actually happening is you're gaining 2 military slots, and those could be conscription plus the one that gives you amenities, which is really, really nice. Retainers, I think it's called. And then the Merchant Republic. Same rate of earning envoys. Let's take a look at the bonuses that it gets. +2 trade routes, very, very nice as well. Trade routes are very, very strong in this game. They give you, mostly when I'm sending them internally, they're giving you at this stage in the game often like 4 food, 4 hammers, or 5 food, 4 hammers, 4 food, 5 hammers, something around there, something like 9 or 10 yield to or 8 or 10 yield to the absolute best yields that you can get, which is pretty damn nice. And has a 15% discount on gold purchases as a whole, which gets further reduced by 1% for every 15 turns on standard speed. The layout is also pretty nice, with now 1 military, 2 economic, 1 diplomatic, and 2 wildcards. This is probably the best of the SimCity, the non-military options of government for this era for sure, which is because it just has the most amount of economic and wildcard slots, which are going to be really, really useful for keeping your economy going, for keeping your infrastructure rolling. It's a very, very nice set of bonuses. But as I said, Theocracy is one of the most interesting to me because I think it offers a game option that no other government choice now offers. You can do stuff with faith purchasing militarily in a way that you couldn't in any other civilization. This remains one of my goals, to continue playing with this, preferably as Japan or Russia, to get an extremely high faith generation game and convert that into a timing push in the Renaissance with Theocracy for some sort of ridiculous military purchasing where an army appears out of nowhere, because I can purchase 2 military units per city for like 6 turns as I dump a huge amount of accumulated faith into military all at once. So I think this is my favorite government choice right now, even if I don't think it's always the best government choice. It's certainly the one that I want to play with the most because I think it has really cool options for something you could do in the game. All right, let's assign a government choice and take a look at the new cards available to us. All right, first of these, Machiavellianism. So 50% production towards spies. Spy operations take 25% less time. I find spies to be a bit of an annoyance in this game, both on the using them as well as having them used on you. 50% production towards spies is nice. I think it's probably worth using that when you're producing your spies if you can time that right. I don't think it's probably worth keeping this spy in here for this amount of time. Yes, 25% less time is a nice reduction, but you still don't have enough diplomatic policy slots to be wasting them on things like this. I still think Charismatic Leader is stronger than any other option at this stage in the game. Continuing to get those envoys as quickly as possible means more and more city-state bonuses, and at this stage in the game, when you're hitting the Renaissance era, this stage of the game is going to be, and completing the Renaissance era in particular, you're going to be having a lot of districts in your cities. You're starting to have 3 to 4 districts in those cities. Those districts are going to start being very strong. You're going to want them to get boosted by commercial city-states. You're going to want them to get boosted by industrial city-states. You're going to want them to get boosted by science city-states, because you're going to have all of them in those. You're going to have a campus service, an industrial site, and a commerce site in each of your cities. And it'd be really, really nice to get those tier 2 and tier 3 city-state bonuses and keep those and keep as many of those as possible, which means you're going to want as many envoys as you can possibly get from Charismatic Leader. So yeah, this may be situationally useful where you're building the spies, but I don't think you can really afford to leave it in one of your slots to keep running those operations a little bit faster, especially since those operations seem to have such a high rate of failure. The rate of failure seems to be different than the reported rate of failure. At least in my experience, it seems to fail a lot more. So I don't know if that is a tooltip problem or if I'm just getting particularly unlucky, but I feel spies are a little bit weaker on the offense than I was expecting them to be, and I find them on the defense to be really annoying. On the defense, I don't want the operation to take less time because I want him to stay in that stupid site that I told him to protect indefinitely, preferably, because I don't want to have to reassign him every 3 turns or whatever the hell it is that it makes me reassign the spy. So I don't know if this actually affects that or not, but if it does affect the amount of time he stays at home and runs his operation, I don't want a reduction in time. I want an increase in time. So anyways, not real thrilled about that card as a whole, although the 50% production could be nice to get each of your spies out as you're building them. Let's move on to the military policies. Logistics, +1 movement is starting your turn in friendly territory. This is a nice one. This is a nice one that I rarely get to use because it's uncommon that I have 3 military slots that are available to me, and when I do, most of the time I'm still running conscription, I'm still running retainers. That means I only really have 1 military slot available, and I'm probably using this for something to do with production if I'm at war at all. And if I'm not at war, I don't really need logistics. It is convenient. You can move workers around a little bit faster. I can, if barbs spawn in some part of my empire, I can move units to deal with them faster, but it generally just doesn't feel very necessary. The time it would be best used is if I'm reinforcing my front lines from a large empire and my units need to move quicker to get there. But in that case, I'm probably better off using one of these massive production boosts, 100% or 50%, as opposed to getting +1 movement. So I have a hard time finding a place for logistics. It's not that I don't like the bonus, it's that the bonus only applies in friendly terrain. So it's not like I can use it as a combat bonus when I'm attacking my enemy. It's just a bonus that is going to happen for moving stuff around in my empire, and it's just not as strong a bonus as the other bonuses available to me. Wars of Religion, +4 combat strength when fighting civilizations that follow other religions. This is situationally really cool. +4 combat strength isn't a whole hell of a lot. It's a non-zero boost. It's something. You're going to notice it a little bit, but it's not that big a boost. But it becomes really nice when you can stack this with other bonuses. If you have some sort of unique unit that's already stronger in that era, or you have some really serious set of promotions, just getting a little bit more can be that much better. The problem is also that it's often rare that both you and your opponent have a religion, because religions aren't very good in the game and people don't prioritize this. But again, this feels like one of these cards that if you're talking about that faith purchasing strategy by using theocracy, then Wards of Religion might be quite strong with that, because you're guaranteed a religion because you actually invested in religion, you're doing it for military purposes, and maybe the opponent you're attacking has a religion too, in which case +4 combat strength would be a nice little boost for all of your units, which would be pretty awesome. Native conquest, Combat victories over units from earlier eras provide gold equal to 50% of the combat strength of the defeated unit. This is another one of these ones that feels really good when you use it, because you get that pop-up. Oh, I killed it. And like the Pantheon that gives you the pop-up for faith. Oh yeah, it's so good. Here's the gold pop-up, right? I killed a unit, I get some gold. It's actually terrible. It's actually a really terrible policy. Most of the time when you're competing against players, either if they have units that are eras behind you, you're going to stomp them. In which case you don't really need this little gold boost. It's not going to be meaningful to your game at all. If you're already stomping them, a little bit of gold probably isn't that big of a factor in terms of the rest of your game value. If it's a game where you're fighting someone who is close in combat score with you, who has military units that are able to fight your military units, and you need that little bit of oomph to move on, this is not going to give you that little bit of oomph. It's not as good as a production policy. It's not as good as a combat policy, and it probably isn't triggering most of the time anyways, because you're probably fighting units of the same era. I really don't like it. I don't see much of a reason for it. It's okay when I'm fighting like prince level AIs and they're attacking me with lots of stupid units and I just can farm gold out of it. But other than that, it doesn't seem very useful to me versus other games. Perhaps more useful in single player than multiplayer. It just feels very useless to me in multiplayer. All right, and the rest of these are existing ones from the previous era, so we don't need to go over them. Let's dive into the economic policies. Liberalism is the first of these, +1 amenity for each city with at least 2 specialty districts. This is very similar to me to the Medina Quarter. It is addressing a growth problem in my cities. This time, if the growth problem is amenities, that this will be useful. It also has the added benefit of helping to address war weariness. If you are going to war in this era, and the Renaissance is actually a very war-prone era, as people pick up musketmen and bombards very quickly into this, and still have access to knights still being pretty useful in this era. At that stage, that's a pretty common time for war. Getting +1 amenity in each city is actually useful to offset the downside of war weariness as you're fighting. So I think this policy is reasonable. I think it's reasonably strong, not the strongest of policies. The problem is it's now competing with some of the strongest policies in the game. Free market is great. 100% gold yield from commercial hub district buildings is a lot. District buildings have, I mean, if you look at the actual values on markets and banks, they're a lot. This is +3, and then the bank I think is even more than that. Let's take a look. I think it's +5, and then the stock exchange is, I think, again 7. Yeah. So if you have all 3 of those buildings, you're looking at 15 gold, and this is gonna give you an extra 15 gold per city that has those. And it's clearly it's going to be situation. If you don't have those buildings up, it's not all that useful. Gold is not as useful as other yields, but this still tends to be a lot of gold as opposed to a small to moderate amount of gold that you were getting off of town charters. I like this a lot more than I like town charters. The bonus ones that give you +100% from buildings are just a lot stronger than the adjacency bonuses as a whole. Rationalism is perhaps the strongest economic policy in the game at all, like bar none. It's just absolutely incredible. 100% science from campus district buildings. Remember, the game currently encourages you to go very wide. So the best setups, the most efficient setups for generating science in particular are empires with lots of cities. And this is going to affect each of those cities to give you that bonus. You're going to have a lot of science buildings already in play, a lot of libraries, a lot of universities, and later a lot of research labs. And this is going to double the yields that those are giving you. This is extremely strong. A lot of the games are a race to get to rationalism, and the people who don't get rationalism fast enough get left in the dirt as people progress very rapidly through the science tree. At this stage, there's going to be a lot of competing really strong policies that you're going to be struggling to fit into your economic policy slots. In general, I just think economic policy slots are one of the strongest ones available to you, and this is some of the reasons why rationalism being one of them. Triangular trade is fairly interesting. 4 gold and 1 faith from all trade routes. 4 gold is a hell of a lot better. If you remember the previous existing one that gave you 2 faith for trade, or 2 gold for trade routes, 4 is quite a big boost on that. I don't know if it's worth using yet. The 1 faith tends to be inconsequential at this stage in the game. Doubly so for all the empires that don't really care about faith. 4 gold is certainly better than 2 gold, but is 4 gold better than 1 culture and 1 science? I don't know. Certainly the fact that this affects your internal trade routes, so the ones you send to yourself, is good. That makes it more useful in Trade Confederation if I'm sending them internally. But I don't know if it's either of these policies are actually worth a policy slot. You got to think about the stuff you're competing with. Meritocracy is still giving you a ton of culture at this stage in the game. Rationalism is giving you a ton of science at this stage in the game. Free market will give you an unbelievable amount of gold, probably more than what you're going to be getting from triangular trade, since you probably have 1 trade route per city because you built a commerce hub that gives you +1 trade route per commerce hub. But if you have commerce hubs, you probably built your banks and markets, in which case free market is probably just better than triangular trade in terms of the amount of gold it's giving you. So you're competing with those. You might also have Medina Quarter in here, which you're getting the housing, so your cities can keep growing, or the amenity one, so your cities can keep growing. And that's without even thinking about things like occasionally when you swap in the builder policy that gives you more builder charges or something like that. So in other words, you're going to be having to make tough decisions about what economic cards you want already, and it's hard to get away from the very top tier economic cards. So how good is triangular trade? Well, we have to look at that as a comparison to what else is available to plug in at that time. All right, I don't know how to say this word, simultaneum maybe. Doubles the faith yield from holy site district buildings. This is going to be so situational. Certainly, as we've said already, the double yield ones are much better than the adjacency ones in almost all scenarios, but not all scenarios, but mostly, almost across all scenarios. And this one is certainly going to give you a lot of faith. The only time I can see this being useful is if you are using theocracy and looking for some sort of military religious combat, be that via religious combat victory or potentially military units with religious purchasing, then this will potentially be better than it would be otherwise. But other than that, it's a very weak policy. It's only very situationally decent. Religious orders, all religious units gain +5 religious strength in theological combat. I think this is overkill at this point. You already have a bonus towards theological combat from going theocracy. If you have so much more faith generation than they do, you're probably outproducing them in terms of apostles and whatnot if you're spreading that. And I just think that picking this up compared to the other options available is really, really hard. There's just too many good things to be plugging in such a weak policy as this one. I don't think very much of this at all. Colonial offices, 15% faster growth for cities not on your original capital's continent, I think is fairly shit. For lots of reasons. Part of it is because we have a Pangea bias. I play a lot of Pangea and I don't play a lot of naval maps in particular because of isolation and runaways from isolation. It's very difficult to stop a player who has good isolation and better lands. It means you can't use a military option to slow him down, which means that we don't want to be in those scenarios. We don't want the game to be decided by where you spawn and what the terrain is like in your capital. We want there to be interactions, to be forced to deal with players, to have to make hard decisions about what you want to pick to make the game more interesting. So that's the first reason why I don't think this is very good. Second reason why I don't think this is very good is continents are not something you can control the placement of. So on Pangea, there are continents, and those continents spawn essentially random relative to your start location, right? Like you spawn in a position, you might be in the center of a continent, you might be on the border of a continent. So there might be times you can use this, but a lot of times there aren't. And if there are times when you can use this, it's chance-based. You didn't settle your city because it's on a different continent. You settled your city because that was the best spot, and it just so happens that it's on another continent. So most of the time, you're not going to even notice when you settle on different continents unless you're really coming back to look at it. And then the last part is the 15% faster growth bonus that only applies to some of your cities, doesn't apply to your capital because it's not on your capital's original continent, is a pretty weak bonus as a whole. 15% growth is not something we care that much about. Growth is not often the limiting factor. It's not generally food that's the limiting factor in growth in your cities. It's almost always housing up until neighborhoods. And after neighborhoods, maybe growth would be decent. But I'd prefer a more consistent growth that gives me growth in all the cities I want, not just ones on different continents. I think very little of this policy. I think it's very weak. All right, I think the rest of them were existing already, so let's go take a look at our wildcard slots. We've picked up great artists and great engineers in this era. Great artists are useless for everything except tourism, really. Tourism, you're going to want your artists, but they're not a particularly strong great person. I actually don't like the way the tourism great people are. I think the great people are excellent. I think scientists, I think generals, I think merchants, and I think engineers are all very well done. They're fun to use. They're interesting. You want to get them. I think the opposite is true of musicians, artists, and writers, and to a lesser degree, admirals. I think most of the time when you get them, you're fairly bored with them because they don't do anything cool. They just always create great works, and great works are pretty boring, although they are part of the tourism win. I wish the artists, musicians, and writers had some sort of on-use ability in addition to creating great works, just like the other great people did, just for some flavor and interest in terms of picking them. So this will help you with tourism, but there's no reason to do it otherwise, and I find it fairly boring policy in general. Invention, I like. The great engineers are a lot of fun. They have a pretty diverse set of abilities. Most of them are pretty cool. Most of them are pretty good, and a couple of them let you rush wonders, which means that you can grab wonders that you might not have got otherwise. I really like it. Invention's a pretty decent policy card. However, it is up against merchants and scientists, so it can be hard to pick between those, and you are forced to prioritize, which is good. You should be forced to make hard decisions in games. It's part of the enjoyment of them, especially when you're playing against other players competitively. All right, but I think that covers it for the Renaissance. We did cover both the governments and all of the new the new Civics cards policy slots or options, whatever they're quite called. I want to call them social policies because this is the Civ6 replacement for Civ5 social policies. So these Civics cards are what replaces those. So that's what I keep slipping up for on calling them that. Anyways, guys, hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Check me out on Twitch. Hit the follow button over there. And just otherwise, come check out my content. Thanks for watching. FilthyRobot out, and I will see you guys soon.